So welcome, everybody. Welcome back to most people. Welcome to people who are new to the conference. My name is Dan Smith. I'm the director of the Africa Initiative here at the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. We are hosting a conference which began yesterday on media and democracy in Africa. And we're now going to hear from our second keynote speaker, Mohamed Abdelfattah, the communications director for the Committee to Protect Journalists. Mohamed joined CPJ in 2023. He oversees efforts to expand the organization's global reach. He began his career as a journalist in Egypt, where he covered the Arab Spring uprisings, broke stories of police abuse, and produced coverage that challenged the entrenched authoritarian government's hold on the free flow of information. He was the Cairo correspondent for the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle in 2012, where he reported on the aftermath of the Arab Spring. In 2011, he was recognized by the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression for his role in covering police brutality. During the 2011 Egyptian uprising, he was the field producer for CNN International, helping the team produce effective coverage despite government harassment, mob violence, and an internet shutdown, an experience that showed him firsthand the real dangers correspondents face in doing their job. Prior to CPJ, he helped advance innovative solutions to the criminal justice reform in his role as a senior communications manager at Impact Justice, where he led media outreach and social media strategy during a time of rapid growth. From 2017 to 2022, he led Northwestern University's global media strategy in his roles as global editor and associate director of global communications, where his work included helping faculty members to draft, edit, and place op-eds in publications such as Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Times. So clearly he has a lot of experience that's relevant for the discussions we were having about how to get media and academia to collaborate and cooperate and do a better job together. He grew up in Alexandria, Egypt, where he graduated with a BA in English from Alexandria University. So Mohamed, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for the generous introduction. And thank you to Brown University, yourself, the Watson Institute. Thank you to Cherno for putting together this really valuable forum where we get to discuss really important questions about media and democracy in Africa, but also take a global view on the state of press freedom worldwide. As Dan mentioned, I grew up in Egypt, where I was a journalist at a period of time, what everybody refers to as the Arab Spring. And I saw authoritarianism, I saw democracy triumph, and then I saw authoritarianism come back again. And right now, it's giving me a lot of flashbacks to live through what's happening here in the US, but to see also more globally the ascent of authoritarianism almost everywhere. There are a few bright spots, and the retreat of democracy. And with that, a lot of the rights that we take for granted, a lot of the freedoms that we rely on to lead better lives. I would have loved to present to you today things that are not grim, but sadly they are. The state of press freedom worldwide now is not a pretty picture. We happen to be an organization focused on journalist protection in particular. So the subject matter that we handle is really about journalists getting killed, about journalists getting imprisoned, sometimes very harsh sentences, harassed, a lot of journalists having to flee, live in exile. It's a very challenging picture. Every year, there are three sort of flagship reports that the Committee to Protect Journalists produces or produced. We have a report focused on killed journalists. We have a report focused on imprisoned journalists, and we have an impunity index. It's not hyperbolic. It's what the data shows. 2024 was the deadliest year on record for journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists has been keeping records since 1992. For all of those decades, no bigger number of journalists has ever been killed, 124. the vast majority of those journalists have been killed by the Israeli military in the Israel-Gaza war. More than a third of those journalists have been killed are freelancers, and as you see the trajectory here, that is really on the rise. Freelancers make up a significant portion of journalists who, on the receiving end of different forms of harm, whether it's death or other forms of threats, especially in regions where the media ecosystem is underdeveloped or undeveloped. They do multiple jobs. So they might be in between jobs. They might be doing photography here and doing videography there, picking up freelance work. All the most reputable news organizations that you all know about rely on those freelancers. Most of the coverage, most of what we now know, for example, about the war in Gaza, to which no media has any access, comes from those freelancers. And so a big chunk of that number of freelancers have been killed in 2024 is also from the Gaza Strip. We have observed, obviously, that this is the most dangerous time to be a journalist, and that's really purely based on data. The frequency with which journalists have been killed in 2024, late 2023, with the start of the Israel-Gaza war, has us working day and night. The pace of attacks is really unrelenting. I've never known the real literal meaning of the word unrelenting until I started working, and all of the teams started working on this issue. This is Hamza Al-Dahdouh, a camera. Sorry. He's a camera operator for Al Jazeera. He was targeted in an Israeli drone strike January 7th, 2024. He's the son of a really well-known correspondent in the Middle East and North Africa, Wael Al-Dahdouh, who's the Gaza bureau chief for Al Jazeera. He had to see, his son killed and buried, targeted, murdered by those Israeli drones. Israel has made lots of unsubstantiated claims that Al-Dahdouh was a member of a militant group. They make these claims all the time. None of them have ever been proven. Over in Haiti, Jamie Jean, Haiti is a country that came out on top in our annual impunity index. And this is an index where we specifically calculate how many journalists were killed where accountability just was not reached. And then we do a certain ratio, divide that by the number of the population. Haiti is number one. Gang violence in that country and the total collapse of society there is having really, really enormous impact on those journalists. He's a 44-year-old father of 6. He was covering a media event December 24th at the General Hospital in downtown Port-au-Prince when suspected gang members opened fire as journalists gathered at the hospital gates. Jean is a reporter and host for online media outlet Mona Febon, and freelance journalist Markindi Natu were killed and 7 others injured at the event to mark the reopening of the hospital. A local gang leader claimed responsibility for the attack shortly afterward, saying the gang coalition had not authorized the hospital reopening. That's how bad it is in Haiti. Across the world, in Ukraine, Victoria Rushina was actually killed in Russia, 27-year-old. She died while being transferred for a prisoner exchange. She covered the war in Ukraine for several Ukrainian media outlets. Her detention was actually confirmed by Russia in April of last year. And the Ukrainian authorities are investigating her death right now under the Ukrainian criminal code. This is a very, very sad and recent case of Albino Sibia in Mozambique, who goes by the name Mano Shotas. It was very difficult to find a picture that was not graphic. Glad I found this one. But a police officer in the Mozambican border town of Rissano Garcia shot blogger Albino Sibia twice in the back on December 12th while he was broadcasting live on his Facebook page. A lot of the journalists that we work with, we see a lot of cases in Africa and other places. Their method of journalism, their platform, they're broadcasting through social media. They have a really popular Facebook page. They have a really wide-reaching WhatsApp group, an Instagram account, just because of the nature of the media landscape. But they are doing journalism. They're publishing information in the public interest, talking about corruption or talking about police abuse, among so many other issues. Win Tut U in Myanmar, he worked for the exile-run Democratic Voice of Burma, was shot and killed along with a childhood friend during a raid on his house. Two members of the Kyaiktu Revolution Force armed group, one of several resisting the military junta since it took power in a 2021 coup, also were killed in the attack. Wu began working as a citizen journalist for DVB in 2022 and had been a staff reporter covering news in Mon State for over a year at the time of his death. This very grim picture that we're seeing about journalist killings around the world, not just in Gaza, it's in many other places every year, is always enforcing the message for us that we see and always observe that impunity is really deeply entrenched. We keep repeating that phrase every year with all the authorities that we happen to meet with, decision makers we sit down with. Accountability in journalist killings, it's just incredibly awful. We're not asking for journalists to be exceptionalized or treated as a distinct class, but it's really devastating how nobody almost gets held to account. Some of these cases, some form of accountability or justice might even happen like 20 years later, 30 years later, and it's really something to reflect on to see that. We also track journalists who've been imprisoned every year. 360 journalists were behind bars in 2024. This is also a record, the second highest number of journalists behind bars that we've ever recorded. The primary drivers of journalist imprisonment in 2024 were authoritarian repression. We see that in China, in Myanmar, in Vietnam, Belarus, Russia, conflict and war. We see that in Israel. We see that in Russia and its war on Ukraine. Political, economic instability at large. We see those things driving imprisonment and prosecution of journalists in places like Egypt, Nicaragua, and Bangladesh. By our count, those were the top jailers of journalists last year. Leading the chart is China, followed by Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories, Myanmar, Belarus, Russia, Egypt, Eritrea, Iran, Vietnam, and Azerbaijan. It's interesting to reflect also on key trends that we've been noticing. The sentencing of those journalists, it just keeps getting harsher with time, longer sentences. As you can see here, about 54 journalists got sentences of over 10 years. 10 journalists got a life sentence. It's just really unimaginable. 62 journalists, 1 to 5 years, and it doesn't show signs of abating. In Myanmar, one of the most glaring illustrations of this harsh sentencing is Chin Dui. She was denied legal representation during her trial by a secret military tribunal. She received a life sentence in 2024 on charges of illegal possession of an unregistered drone. Just because they think she does not have the legal right to a drone, she got a life sentence. Just really, really mind-boggling, stuff that we have to look at. Vast majority of the charges, again, looking at the notion of criminalization of journalism and what are sort of the allegations that get put forward against journalists, really anti-state charges. Literally, some of these charges are like, you're opposing the state. You're an enemy of the state, whatever that means. We see anti-terror charges, but this is just something that obviously it's a playbook that they all borrow from each other. Interesting, our data also tracked what are the beats, the topics that these journalists cover for the most time. You could see politics up there, followed by human rights, and I think there is a degree of overlap. Some of the journalists who cover this also cover that. You see corruption, not too far down. Business, potentially there is a little bit of overlap between some business stories that we're talking about corruption, so it's in the same vein. Those who cover sports apparently are having the time of their lives. But it's really interesting to reflect on that every year, because a lot of the journalism, when we look at those journalists who've been persecuted or harassed or jailed or killed, it's really about the fundamental role of journalism, right? Interacting with power, holding power to account. A president, you sure know, yesterday was talking about corruption allegations, spending in the Sierra Leone government. It's these things that gets them really angry, and it's these things that journalists want to publish in the public interest. And these are things that, sadly, they get persecuted for the most. Just as in journalist killings, those behind bars as well, freelancers make a substantial number, 39%. I don't have the number for prior years off of the top of my head now, but I do have a sense that the portion of freelancers is probably on the rise. The other key trend in jailings, in imprisonment of journalists, is really arbitrary detention, right? Due process is out the window most of the time. People being held in administrative detention, whatever the period of choice for the government might be, 2 weeks, and then it gets renewed, or 15 days, or 3 months. And it could get renewed forever. It's really something that is deeply frustrating. The picture on the left is Abdelfattah, who's an Egyptian British blogger and journalist. The Egyptian government, in his case, violated its own criminal procedure law with a 2-year extension of his incarceration. He should have been released in September of last year, even according to their own law. And in just complete defiance of the court system, he's just inside the jail cell. It's as though the judicial system basically does not exist. In the middle, some of you may be familiar. Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala has now crossed more than 800 days in arbitrary detention. And that's despite the fact that there is somebody in power right now who is actually claiming to be pro-press freedom, pro-human rights, pro-democracy. And he seems to be fighting some kind of entrenched judiciary from a prior regime that seems to have some kind of revenge with this journalist. Over to the right, that's Jimmy Lai, publisher in Hong Kong, has been held since December 2020 amid repeated postponements of his trial on national security charges. Thank you. I want to add a few words, maybe before the thank you, which is really reflecting on what some of these trends mean, but also some of the other trends that we're noticing here in the US that might have serious implications for press freedom around the world. We really see that America right now is at a crossroads. Press freedom here is under significant pressure. We used to think, or some used to think, that threats to journalists used to happen somewhere else, or were the purview of some other countries that were less developed or less democratic. Our data shows that that's not really the case. For some perspective, we do have an emergencies response team that trains journalists, right? Gives them safety training, security training, and that sort of thing. In 2020, in the United States, we trained 20 reporters on safety issues, right? In 2024, anybody wants to guess what the number might be? Number of journalists in the US that we have trained in 2024 on safety issues? It was only 20 in 2020. More. Huh? Close, yeah, 950. 950. So for the good math wizards, how many multiples that is of 20? And the requests just keep on coming. They do not stop. Journalists publish the story, they're getting harassed for it online. Women see a disproportionate level of that kind of harassment. Just yesterday, we issued a safety advisory specifically for journalists who are planning to come to the United States. So those are international journalists, international editors who would on any normal day come here to do a story about whatever they want to work on. And we're giving them tips about how to deal with border guards at the border. We're giving them tips about how to secure their devices, how to use burner phones, how to delete certain kinds of data. Be mindful, sadly, of certain things that could be on your device that could be critical of the current administration, because we have seen actual instances of people being turned away or denied entry because of these issues. And it's really sad. The other thing that we're worried about right now is, obviously, it seems that the current administration is using the apparatus of the state against media, right? The judiciary, the Justice Department, the Federal Trade Commission. It's as you all know, it's denying access to reputable news organizations, and that's on top of never-ending rhetoric that has gone on for years that vilifies journalism, that delegitimizes journalism and the normal work of media. The Federal Communications Commission right now, the FCC, is investigating CBS, ABC, NBC, NPR, and PBS. These are household names in America and around the world. They are being interrogated or investigated on an array of allegations for the journalism that they do. Mr. Trump himself has sued ABC, CBS, the Des Moines Register for a bill he didn't like, and the Pulitzer Prize Board. The panel a few minutes ago obviously was talking about funding. We're seeing the impact of that everywhere. A lot of these organizations that had their funding cut were organizations that would actually really help us also document attacks on the press everywhere. And they were really tracking human rights violations around the globe. When these organizations are not there anymore, we have no idea what's going on. They don't have a voice anymore. The gutting of USAID and the US Agency for Global Media, which funds Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, has resulted in serious implications. This has instantly created a vacuum for misinformation and disinformation, especially by other powers that do have information agendas and have pursued those information agendas for a very, very long time. Basically, China and Russia, and maybe a couple of others. Countries with undeveloped or underdeveloped media ecosystems suddenly lost a trusted source of information. Remember, places like Voice of America, I lost count of how many languages Voice of America broadcasts in. It's really, the reach, right? The reach of Voice of America is really everywhere. There is also a real risk that with the erosion of these democratic norms here in the US and what the role that the US would play in the world, there is a real risk that one of the strongest advocates in the room for human rights, for press freedom, will leave that room. The so-called arsenal for democracy, there is a real danger. It might become an arsenal for autocracy. We're not seeing it very aggressively now, but we're seeing the absence of supporting democratic and sort of journalistic endeavors of press freedom. But there are clear signs that our job of working with governments, especially governments that value human rights and democracy, calling them up and saying, "Hey, this is happening there. Please help." There may not be somebody at the end of that line. Leaders around the world, as you all know, just happen to look up to the United States and what happens in the United States, for better or for worse, regardless of your opinion of how the U.S. functions or behaves. The United States just happens to be the standard bearer on press freedom issues and human rights issues. It just happens to be that really bad leaders around the world look at the US and are like, "Oh, okay, well, they're getting away with it. I might as well do that. Or I'm going to jail those journalists. Nobody's going to talk to me about it." This is all obviously very depressing, very grim. It's just a reality, but I'm doing my best to end this on a hopeful note, or at least impart a little bit of positivity as much as I can. And it's something that we're trying to pursue at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Is the key word here is solidarity, right? In the absence of all these powers that have provided a lot of good instrumental support for a free press in the past, we need to band together. We need to stick together. We need to pool our resources. On the continent, maybe we need to explore new advocacy mechanisms, right? The African Union with different court systems. Sometimes mere solidarity between journalists could mean the difference between life and death for someone. We've all seen that when governments do feel the pressure. One thing I always like to say, working in human rights and press freedom is very frustrating, is very depressing, because you always feel you're not reaching the goal, you're not getting the journalists released yet. It takes a while. You're anxious, you're depressed, you're sad. I also want you to know that those dictators are really anxious and are really insecure about themselves. Why would they put a journalist behind bars? A guy or a woman who just puts words on paper that talks about something. It's literally words. Why would, because the function of journalism, that they do not like, it is really contesting reality in the minds of the public. And dictators do not like that. Dictators want to control how people think, want to shape the narrative. They're already very insecure and very afraid of public anger towards them. So if anybody writes anything, sometimes it's a piece on the web like 150 people have seen. Somebody goes to jail. I'm like, why do you care? So we need to understand that dictators also have their vulnerabilities, and sometimes they give up. Not just us. So I would just ask us, all of us in our own sphere of influence, in our circle of family, friends, amongst our peers, our journalistic associations, other things that we're involved in, as much as we can. Let's hope that we ride out this period of time through solidarity, through banding together, helping one another, whether it's a tweet or whether it's attending an event or whether it's signing a petition or whether it's donating a little bit of money. You never know what kind of resource is going to make the difference on one particular case or another. And I thank you for listening that far.
So the floor is open for questions. Can you field them?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. Yes. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, thanks for the keynote speech. I was wondering, some days ago there was a whistleblower from Facebook/Meta testifying in front of Congress, I think it was in front of Congress, correct me if I'm wrong, explaining that she had proof that and screenshots of mails that she's shown that Meta had been collaborating with China actively, helping tracking down Chinese dissidents based in the US even before Trump was elected. I was wondering if at your organization you looked into that, and if you were aware of this testimony from her, and if you thought that taking this example, it might have happened with other authoritarian regimes that are not only China.
Yeah,
Thank you.
No, that's a great question. I mean, one of the several ways that we're tracking the world of technology just so happens through the lens of spyware, surveillance technologies, and how that is being used always to harass journalists, to hack their phones, know their sources, or to endanger their lives. We don't happen to be an organization specifically focused on, whistleblowers coming out of tech companies, but we've always expressed a lot of concerns about the impact of tech companies, when it comes to journalists and when it comes to media. So I think maybe the specific question might be more fit to a different organization, but we're really concerned about the impact of a lot of what's happening right now in the tech world when it comes to media. We're seeing several queries or an emerging theme that journalists are starting to lose trust in a lot of tech tools, thinking that it's now X is owned by Elon Musk and he just happens to hold these opinions. It doesn't like the media. Is my data safe on X? How should I communicate? What's the best app where it may not get hacked or compromised? And on the digital front, it gets worse every year. They try to adopt even more sophisticated means for the journalists protecting themselves and for the enemies of the press, trying to find other ways of hacking into journalists' phones. Yeah.
On what you were saying, kind of trying to end on a positive note. But my question is more related about what is your advice to young people right now and what we should be doing? I think we are all feeling very pessimistic, and especially for some of us that are entering the workforce. And going to this university, being very aware of how it is affecting us, our students, and reading what's on the news every day and feeling frustrated, but wanting to do something about it, but not exactly sure what are those tangible steps we can be doing. So I was wondering if you have advice on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think on one level, that the one thing that's in your control right now is to just hold these values dear, right? You believe in the role of journalism in society, the civic role it plays, why press freedom matters, why democracy matters. If you're able to maintain those values and sort of preach in your own circle of influence, family and friends, I think that's way more than enough. I could tell a student at Brown, inevitably, very highly likely in the future, you are holding a leading position somewhere. You will have substantial influence in your sector down the line. How do you use that influence, to push for the values that you believe in? Whether it's a free press, whether it's democratic values, sometimes it's easy to lose hope. But I think when you look at the longer arc, it always comes around. So I think in the end things should be fine, or at least I try to deceive myself that they're going to be fine. But thank you.
Yeah, just a quick one. In terms of your operations and your campaign strategies and everything combined at CPJ, has anything fundamentally changed as a result of the madness happening in this country now?
Yeah, we're working a lot more. We just don't have enough hours in the day to catch up with the unrelenting attacks on media. I think that's the more fundamental sort of challenge. It's enormous. Where we these attacks used to happen from time to time. Now it's like almost daily. I think it's just there's just enormous pressure to do that. And one workaround is we're trying to pool our resources with other press freedom organizations or come together for joint action, joint advocacy, joint campaigning, discover partnerships, whether it's with universities or with media organizations to advance the things that we care about in terms of press freedom. I mean, I would say I joined the Committee to Protect Journalists December 2023, so it's more just like a year and a half so far. That was in the middle of the war in Gaza. Almost 90% of our bandwidth is it's just like, you know, journalists are falling left and right. Like you don't even know what to think, right? There isn't enough time in the day to even write enough statements about everything that happens. I'm sure our colleagues in RSF see the same thing. It's just really difficult. So it has just gotten a lot more challenging, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. From what you showed, your own data from the CPJ, I am forced to believe that Africa appears to be doing better in terms of the protection of the press freedom and the rights of journalists, because when you show the data, clearly we have only 2 African countries in the first 10 you show the first fact, and then even that you have Egypt and Eritrea sitting below China and others. And so would you think, I mean, it's fair if you think Africa is doing better? Of course, we've got some cases, but from your data, it's clearly that we're doing better. Is that the case? And if that is the case, how can we improve on it? Because certainly there'll be the dictatorships and all that, but I just want to believe that we seem to be doing better than the other countries.
No, that's interesting. And obviously, I am not the Africa expert. And you all know that the Africa expert who's not in the room is Angela Quintal, who runs the Africa program, who's sending her warm greetings to all of you. She tells me, yes, it is a mixed picture in Africa. There are some bright spots. Things seem to be headed in a good direction, which, again, to the earlier point of maybe there is room to explore how to even advance that even further within Africa using sort of African mechanisms, or whatever sort of the trend right now, and try to double down on that and improve it. It's making me think when the Egyptian uprising happened, that was 2011, and all of a sudden, almost the freedom that you feel in the atmosphere or on the streets, almost like you're reading about the Paris Commune, right? It's like, wow, so idealistic. I won't forget that there was one day, somebody who works for Human Rights Watch wanted to meet with me and a few others. I was like, oh, interesting. Okay, maybe, he wants to interview us about, human rights situation in Egypt. I'm like, whoa, okay. And he was actually exploring ways we could lend support, to them as now a bright spot where human rights might sort of flourish and democratic norms might grow. And I was really sort of happy with that, but also confused. I'm like, oh, like an American guy coming from the US and telling me and Tahrir Square, like, oh, how do we do advocacy together and help us advance this and advance that? And I think in Africa, maybe that's the same now. And I think we'll try to take sort of advantage of that. That would be really great. Yeah.
My question is, how concerned is CPJ about human rights advocates and journalists who are fleeing from dictatorship to come to the US? This place has been home to so many of us who have, were scared and had to leave our countries. But today, with this new approach from Washington, do you think journalists and human rights advocates will benefit from the same protection they used to? And how concerned are you?
Yeah, I'm very concerned, and I hope they maintain the protection. I mean, maybe another angle to that we have actually been tracking is, there are many journalists who work for Voice of America here in the US, for the Middle East Broadcasting Network here. They have a large operation in Virginia. These networks are not just globally headquarters. A lot of those people are here on visas. And so it's I don't want to talk too much about that, but we are concerned that we just want them to maintain their status and not feel, a lot of them came here to actually work for these organizations because they were kicked out of the countries or they fled, right? Exiled. They did journalism back home that challenged power, that, where can we go? Can we go back? So it's very, very challenging, very, very tricky. But we're seeing pathways for hope. It's not completely bleak, but it is a real challenge. I don't know if we have seen that exactly with journalists who have come here sort of prior to what this administration did to these global agencies who are exiled and now they feel, it's a real risk. The current administration seems to be looking for opportunities to just essentially deport people. We're always seeing that, and we're trying to make sure that that doesn't touch journalists who've been here, also fleeing a lot of danger. There was a journalist in Cuba, I can't remember the name right now, after the decision to sort of end that humanitarian parole sort of status, I think for Cuba and a few other countries, he got a letter in the mail. And this guy did jump to Cuba. And tell me about it, like, you're gonna go back. And thank God, maybe there's a pathway now, we're working on a pathway where he's able to stay, but it's every day where things like that come at us and we try to keep up. Okay, sure.
So following President Trump's second coming, I've monitored conversations on I've monitored conversations on especially X, formerly Twitter. Yeah. And there is this food for thought out there that he isn't silencing media. He isn't oppressing free press and all that. However, what he's doing is that he's rather defunding traditional media and focusing on social media. And it is because of how he felt his first administration wasn't supported by traditional media. And even to the point that even on social media, most of his account, his X account, then Twitter account was blocked and all that. But then we know who owns it now, so he gets to come back. And so there are people that are saying that it is not really that he's suppressing press freedom and all that, but they think that he believes that social media or new media is the way to go. And that is why he's defending those ones. Do you agree with that, or do you have any better explanation?
I think it just so happens that maybe a lot of the media that doesn't seem to be legacy or traditional or citizen journalism right now, in his view and the view of his entire political camp, just happen to be filled by people who like him, right, and who give him a lot of favorable coverage. And it just so happens that what he calls the legacy news organizations or the traditional media or whatever sort of refrain, mainstream media, corporate media, all these things, these happen to be organizations that produce critical journalism. And if the story shows, unfavorable coverage of one of his policies or his views, he just really doesn't like it. And if you do some research, he has a long history of suing the media for a very long time. It's not just connected with, oh, I'm just getting into power now and I have this project and they're obstructing me, so oops, I need to crack down on the media. It seems that he just never liked critique, right? Which is scary, especially, thinking the countries where we come from. So, leaders are not able to accept critique. They're very sensitive. And he has a similar temperament, which is sort of scary if that gets operationalized. But I think it's agnostic of the medium, in my view. Yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking of President Trump himself suing a lot of media, as you said, and this in an African perspective also, I think needs a lot of reflection. with some powers, for example, like either in Cameroon, in Rwanda, or in many other difficult countries, including those ruled by juntas. If people, they might say, okay, if Trump is just sending to jail, sending to court some media, those people will have all the courage to do that. Otherwise, with argument necessary that, okay, Trump has done this in the US. And this is something on which I think African civil society organizations also are more and more trying to have a great thinking on how to develop a quantum narrative on that in terms of to be proactive. But what I think also is all the advice. I have read yesterday's CPJ's statement on the advice to those people. So, and I prior to when I was preparing to come here, I just informed two or three people I know out here, and then one of them was saying, okay, I know Providence is quite far from where I am. Unfortunately, we won't have time to meet, but if you're traveling as a journalist, but take care of your laptop and your cell phone. But I was shocked. Why? Because more and more people, they are trying to check laptops and cell phone for some personal, some individual peoples, and this is most of them are journalists or critical peoples or human rights advisor, human rights activists, and so on and so. But for me, for having traveled extensively to the US, this is the first time. This is really, really, really new. I knew, and I was like, when I was just handing over my passport, I was like, maybe this is the guy who's gonna start asking questions. But hopefully it went through. But the risk is that if that starts within the US, it will give more courage for others also to target peoples, including journalists, including human rights activists, and those who are critical. This is my thought. These are my thoughts on this. And one of the key words also you have said is in terms of advocacy is solidarity. I think it is right now in the world. We need to develop more and more solidarity because it's really high time for activists, human rights defenders, journalists, critics, academics, and those people who are very free in their way of thinking and very independent to develop more and more solidarity, because if not, we're gonna all be trapped, into this kind of development we have seen. We have seen first here with the second Trump era, and our fear, as I said, is really to see this kind of behavior starting to take place in some countries in Africa. But it was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just okay, just to add a bit to what Sadibu just said, I think, in all honesty, like I said yesterday, this is surprising here. It's shocking to people what's happening. Back in Africa, we are used to this, but then even the worst dictators in Africa today, they will feel offended to be compared to Trump right now. Because, all these things happening here, it took in any of the African countries where it occurs, it will take them years to do this. What we've seen here is that they weaponizing chaos to confuse and overwhelm the media. I don't know how journalists covered this, because you are in one story, in a blink of an eye, something happens, another chaos. So it's so overwhelming. And I think, like Sadibu said, I guess for a lot of people, this is the first time America, everybody's El Dorado. People get excited coming to the US. I'm sure now I've heard stories of planes not full, airports kind of empty. When I was coming in Dublin, the queue, you see, the people are anxious. It's very tense. immigration line is so tense, everybody is watching. I had to describe democracy to the immigration officer. Where you go, oh, democracy in Africa. It's like, what sort of democracy? I made sure to stress Africa. So, you know, this has nothing to do with the US, it's Africa. So I had to define democracy and stuff before I could. I emptied everything, my phones and stuff. It didn't have to be that way. Nobody would have imagined the US could be like this, but I guess, yeah, that's true. Now, people who were scared of the US or worried that with dictatorship, the US authorities and partners would, penalize them and stuff. Now they will do this with pride and no matter what they've done, what kind of dictatorship or chaos that they've done in their country, I don't think they will catch up with the speed, it's been done here.
No, that's a great point. Like, one thing of the digital front, I mean, just try to imagine the tech sector here, which is the most advanced, the most sophisticated in the world, blending with these authoritarian intentions, right? Can a border guard just plug in your phone and do, run some kind of software, right? Boom, in 10 seconds, like boom, and AI is like, oh, help me understand, what's the data, that's super easy now. So like in other countries where, where we come from or other places, like they have to figure out even slower means of how to even figure that out, lengthy interrogations in a back room or real pressure or whatever. But now it's all this data out there that could be accessed. I'm like, it's not very reassuring. Yep. Okay. Sorry, Dan.
I guess I wanted to ask a question about the relationship between detention, imprisonment, harassment, and so on of the media, and what happens to the rest of society. So political prisoners could be one category, but also just I guess my question is about the relationship between what a dictatorial regime is doing to the press and what it's doing more broadly, right? So most of the countries that you talked about that imprison or harass or kill journalists are countries where they're doing all kinds of things to their populations, right? And my question is about the whether you in your organization or whether you yourself kind of see any trends or any have any sense of like which comes first. I mean, sometimes like are journalists targeted because it's a good way to kind of control the rest of the population, intimidate the rest of the population? Or are there other cases where like, the rest of the population is kind of been under control, been impinged on, been harassed, and journalists kind of come later or something like that? I mean, is there any kind of direct relationship? Are these governments strategizing? I mean, I feel like with our current administration here, it's not clear that there's a strategy, right? I mean, or if there is a strategy, the strategy seems to be we want to impose our authoritarian will. We're going to do it by it's almost like a terrorist kind of approach, right? They don't think they have the wherewithal to imprison all journalists. They don't have the wherewithal to deport all undocumented migrants. So they do these seemingly random, fairly spectacular things. And then everyone who's entering the U.S. is worried about what's going to happen. Chances are that whether your phone's going to be searched or you're going to be stopped, very small actually. But everyone is afraid, right? So I guess my question is sort of about what you see as in terms of the journalist stuff, what you see as the strategy of the governments, and how does that map onto kind of larger ways in which they aim to control populations more generally?
No, it's a great question. I mean, it's more of my personal observation and in my own experience in Egypt, going into, growing up under authoritarianism, getting a couple of years of some democratic dream, then a harsh authoritarian winter. Definitely the free press goes away first. They're an easier target. I think anecdotally, you see that in other countries around the world too. Sometimes I almost feel it's a prelude, it's a precursor to a country already that is on the retreat in terms of democracy, that it's just, they're always an easier target. imagine, you're angry with a journalist, but you're also angry with this opposition political candidate who has a chance at your seat and power, but he or she just happens to have a lot of public support, but the journalist doesn't have as much public support, or could easily be defamed or libeled or harassed or stuff like that. I always feel it's an easier target, and they happen to be targeted first. I mean, shortly before I left Egypt, I could tell, increasing sort of police harassment of anybody with a camera or any journalist doing any field work on the street. Although technically that period of time was still, democracy wasn't completely absorbed or evaporated, but you could see sort of almost as an early warning system. But I think this is more of my personal reflection, looking at sort of anecdotal trends. We don't happen to be tracking it in terms of an actual data point. I mean, maybe in an ideal world, you would look at the sort of the index that comes out of Freedom House and say what's going on in terms of democracy standards and what's going on in terms of press freedom. They do go hand in hand in many ways. Sort of the brief democratization experience that happened in Egypt that was still under Mubarak in the early 2000s, and that's when I actually later on, when I started my journalism career, there was some kind of opening, under pressure from the Bush administration, democracy in the Arab world, and all of that stuff. And that slight opening, I think, created a lot of space for democratic action in Egypt that eventually, over years, resulted in the uprising and in the Arab Spring and in the achievement of some democratic gains. And that's why, when authoritarianism was sort of restored in a military coup in 2013, that repression of media was so strict, was so harsh. Everything in their toolbox they used against the media, buying up media organizations, jailing journalists, killing them, just really sending a strict and not allowing any kind of critical journalism to slip out of that system by any margin. Making the Mubarak government looks like a paradise in comparison. I think they do happen to go behind it.
The last one from myself, I guess. So I've listened to my colleagues here, and I'm seeing the comparison of, or the worry or concern for my colleagues about the fact that what is happening here might embolden our leaders back home. Okay. However, I stand to differ a bit, because what is happening here, as we all agree, African leaders will not come close to what is going on here. Okay. So my question then is, do you think that what is happening with the current administration in the US will embolden subsequent administrations here in the US? Because whatever Trump has done in the last month has been by the use of executive orders. And these can be reversed using executive orders by the next president. Okay, so we can just say that, okay, it's just for a 4-year period. We can be optimistic that in the next 4 years, someone will come and they use another executive order to reverse all these things. However, if he succeeded in using executive orders to do this, perhaps someone sitting down is admiring him from his party or maybe from the other side, and might decide to, okay, when I come, I'll just continue, or I'll also use the same executive order. So the question then is, do you think that the usage of executive orders perhaps might be relooked at in the US? And also, some things or some topics or some sensitive stuff should not be allowed under the use of executive, like press freedom, like funding of these. Maybe they should rather separate them so that presidents will not be able to use such powers to do what they are doing. Do you call for that?
So, I mean, in terms of being, from the point of view of a press freedom organization, if you look at what happened in Trump 1.0, there was backsliding in terms of press freedom, journalist safety, and democratic norms, right? I'm not an expert on democratic norms in particular, but there was backsliding when he was vilifying the media and coining the term fake news, right? You have, do a simple Google search and try to bear that search with other world leaders who started copying the exact same rhetoric. and how that was completely weaponized against the media in their own domestic context, domestic politics. Like, oh, the president of the United States is saying this fake news seems to be working. I'm going to use it. Why not? I mean, the most recent, up until very recently, I think South Korea's leader who went through this impeachment kerfuffle, he was having authorities, storm newsrooms and confiscate computers and all of that stuff. And the narrative is like fake news, fake news, fake news. So again, America being the standard bearer, between quotes, is sort of giving a playbook. And politically, you see copycats in different directions. I can't comment too much on the politics of it, but at least from the point of view of a press freedom organization, it is the first term caused damage worldwide by the numbers, by the data.
Sure. Can we pass the mic to you so we can get people online?
I'm just wondering if you think, the arrest of Duterte in the Philippines and Bolsonaro in Brazil, is that a bright spot? Do you think that's going to get any traction very brave journalists in the Philippines covered his period of time. And it seems like, to me, maybe a bright spot, but maybe I'm optimistic.
No, we're actually optimistic. I don't want to say like as a position, like we're optimistic about the Philippines. Right? We are definitely looking at the Philippines right now as, anytime there's a transition of power, especially if it's an authoritarian going out and maybe a different leader coming in, there's always an opportunity to say, hey, there's a new bright opportunity to improve things. And so we have been calling on the new leader in the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, right, to really turn the page on what happened under the Duterte administration. And we could only hope, we could only ask, but there's definitely significant opportunity that might change. I mean, the scale of killings and targeting harassment of journalists that happened under his administration was absolutely horrific. And so there is an opportunity that might change. We had hopes about Bangladesh, right, under Mohamed Yunus. I mean, I think all human rights organizations were feeling like, oh, here's a guy who's the template. He's getting in power. Well, it's complicated. So I think we have to watch and see, but maybe there is a dose of optimism when these changes occur. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much for such a wide, breathtaking presentation. I was just wondering about when you issue statements, when CPJ do their alerts or statements, if there is any follow-up to some of those statements, and what kind of follow-up you usually do, and what's the outcome of or it's just a highlighting a case and then moving on?
No, there's a range of advocacy tools that we use. I mean, the stuff that everybody sees in public coming out of CPJ is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what researchers and advocates of the community to protect journalists try to do. We sit down with governments, decision makers at the highest level as much as we can. We confer with governments that want to support democracy and human rights regularly. We engage in every forum possible to make sure that these positions are advanced and people are getting released or accountability is gained. There is a certain allure to naming and shaming as a strategy for human rights organizations and making noise on behalf of those who have been wronged. And that is still sort of the baseline that we always go for. We have 3 A's at CPJ: awareness, assistance, advocacy, sort of an acronym. Awareness is really any journalist, getting attacked at some point, we try to publicize what happened so that they remain in the public eye and that stuff doesn't go unnoticed. We do advocacy, whether it's in public or in private, and we assist journalists directly, whether it's safety trainings, consultations, grants, stuff of that sort. So yeah, there's definitely a whole spectrum. Yeah.
So if there are no further questions,
We didn't build in many breaks today. We've been going straight since 9 o'clock. Our lunch was also our keynote address. So we have another session that begins in 11 minutes and another one after that. So I say that we should say thank you to Mohamed.
Thank you.